Just want to show something to you guys real quick that I'm very excited about, and it is actually relevant to what we'll be talking about later. But okay, can you see here?
Yeah.
Right. So it's not working fully. This is a rough thing, but you know, down at the bottom we have a bar in author, so you can go between write and map. So this is a huge document. It's a version of my thesis with 70,000 words. But if I now click on outline, that box expands to have options to normal outline, references, concepts, or names. So right now, what you can see here are all my citations by heading, only showing name and date. Is that useful or not useful to you guys?
Go back to the category, and you're clicking there. What does that say? I can't read it because it's so. Let me say that it's hard for me to read this because it's a light gray against a white background, so the contrast isn't great, and it's also small. And even
Yeah,
though I'm wearing super powerful glasses, I can't read what it says at all.
it's made smaller because of both the zoom and the 27-inch monitor it's on right now. On a regular monitor, it's bigger, but within outline, you have three options. One is to just do the outline, actually four, just the outline as normal. One is to see all the names and headings. One is to see all the concepts that you have defined and headings. And then there is references. So what you're seeing here now are all the references. So as I scroll through, retain blah, blah, blah. And also if there are quotes, the quotes show up as well in this.
And so how do you imagine someone using this? What are your thoughts?
The thought is that we have all these options for what to see in the outline, and I'm not going to expect users to go in and change things in the settings. So this is basically, you do an outline to jump around your documents, but at a certain point, you need to have a kind of a clue of, have you cited enough in this section? Have you cited the right people? So that's the thought of just clicking this quickly. You can see here, I've only cited O'Kane and Doherty. Okay, click on that and go through and I can see the citations here.
What happens when you have the same, let's imagine you've got two texts by the same person the same year. How do you differentiate in your world?
In this view, you don't differentiate at all. This is only showing author date here.
Okay, what if you have the same author? Let's say you have Warnack the same date twice. There's two articles that you've cited the same date. How does that differentiate in your, is it
It's
just repeated?
in the outline, it's not differentiated at all in the outline. In the normal export, it is, and then the normal. So this is just designed to give you a view, because in the normal view, they are in this way of referencing, they're in brackets, author dates.
Right, just like in MLA style.
Yeah. So this is just having another option too. It's like here, changing user. Okay, Nelson twice, Holm Nelson. It's also like Mark is really good at making sure that references are done right. Why have I got Nelson here and Holm Nelson? It's a quick way to see that, so I can go in and make sure they're the same, right?
Okay, so if you click on Nelson 2007 or 2003, is that 2003?
Yeah, you click
Click
through
on
here
that.
and you only
Okay,
get to this,
okay,
and it hadn't actually highlighted, so he'll be down. Okay, here's 2002, for instance.
okay. That's great. So going back to my question, go back to that list that you showed of names. So just so you'll know, I think Mark might agree with me. If I had Nelson, let's say I had two Nelsons from the same year, two different works, but the same year. Are they going to repeat twice? In other words, going to be seen Nelson 1999, Nelson 99. And will, if I click on the first Nelson 99, will that take me to the right thing? And the second one takes me to the other thing, or is it just consolidating it into one Nelson?
This list shows all the occurrences. So let's say, for instance, you had quoted the same Ted Nelson article twice in a row, the exact same thing. It would
No,
show
no,
up.
no, no. I'm not.
No, I know. I'm just saying, if to start there, if you'd done that, it would show it twice. But if you had two different Ted Nelson articles from the same year, it would also show them one after the other. So there's no intelligence in this outline view at all. It just shows the citations when it comes across them.
But it would then take me to the correct Nelson, if there's two. It'd take me to the one that corresponds.
If you click on any of these, it only takes you to that heading level. It's not paragraph level addressability.
Okay.
So you would then need to click on it and to get to that.
All right.
But we're here for what Fabienne has to show today, and this is just one of the data types that we obviously will be dealing with, which is, citations. And I look forward to Mark's brief comment.
Yeah, no, it looks very interesting. The thing, in fact, having just put in a paper, which I think my final reference count was 181 out of probably about 260 that I had in my sort of working set, and that's only 8 pages, which was a bit mind melting. The interesting thing I found was the need to track, as it were, the thing you have in your list, which is, blogs 2006. The name of the PDF, if it was not a internet reference or a book, and because I was using LaTeX, the site, and you need all of those because, and in some way it may be ameliorated in your system, but constantly what I found I was doing, I have to be writing an overleaf, but it doesn't particularly matter that I was writing in a web page rather than a local LaTeX authoring thing, is that I was constantly going, so I get back and my PDF sort of viewer would probably have about 20 documents open. I'm thinking, I sort of flick it open and they're all called, ABC123 something, because I tend to hold on to the original file names because that's a sort of provenance issue. And most of the time it doesn't matter. But when you're flicking through a set of references, and the core of this thing had the same 2 authors over a span of about 20 years, writing 2 or 3 papers a year, trying to remember which was what, and opening the right thing quickly when you're just saying, "Oh, I just want to switch back to that thing to check what this is." That's the sort of challenge. I don't note this in any way as a counter to what you show, which I think is really interesting. I'm just digging deeper into the nightmare of actually authoring when you're doing more than trivial amounts of referencing. Frankly, the latter is less common. Normally, you're probably doing fairly light amounts of referencing. And so an interesting thing is where in the sort of display you've showed, the choice is, do you want to see the reference in the text, which you may be writing? So the text at this point may not be particularly sort of have particular tailback to you because you're still writing it, or whether you want to actually bounce to the reference. So that there's this, this is the reflection I have rolling out of this sort of paper I've just done, is at any one time, the answer is different. And the question is, the challenge, let's put it like that, is how you make those things available as they can be at the, and the sort of context switching of, no, I want this reference to open that file, or no, I want to see this reference in the context of where I just used it. And I don't have a fixed answer to it, but this is very interesting to see. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that leads into what Fabienne will be presenting here and introducing Felix to the room. Fabienne will be doing that. He just reminded me of that. Yeah, so Mark, in author, it's really, really simple. It's just a university paper. So the fact that you highlighted these issues means that maybe when we have the references in the XR environment, we can do the kind of things you talk about. That's the dream. So yeah, Peter, briefly, and then we're gonna listen to Fabienne.
Yeah, I'm always torn by whether I should rename PDFs or not. And I just wonder, Mark, how do you deal with the concept of a work in the abstract versus the HTML version of the work, then the PDF version of the work after a couple edits were applied, and, a connected sequence of documents that all represent the same underlying paper, just that it's morphed a little bit over time?
Well, in short, I mean, I don't, but I entirely, simply because I haven't had the need to, but I entirely recognize the scenario you're bringing up, and that's certainly very true. I think more true than a lot of humanities work, where often you're tracking, say, the evolution of a source. I mean, traditionally, the referencing side is where you may have, blogs 2006 A through Z sort of kind of thing as you version those. In today's world, when we're not trapped in the sterility of the printed page, I think there are all sorts of cool stuff you can do. You've got color, you've got shape, you've got all sorts of affordances you can use to give you the tellback that you need. And that doesn't necessarily have to travel through to the final document, I might add. It's just about you in the moment saying, oh, right, okay, so the blue things are not the same as the green things. Right, those are the books, those are the papers, or this thing is that strand, all the square things or something are the 42 different versions of this reference that I'm of this book or this work that I'm talking about. So I think there are lots of ways you can do it. I guess what I'm saying is I'm more hopeful that this is actually going to get easier than it used to be, because before we were fairly limited by the strictures of the time, and that's not to speak ill of them, but I just think we can do things more flexibly now, especially during the authoring phase, where essentially from the authoring phase, unless you're in a large authoring group, it's your private memory palace. So it can be as weird and wonderful as you like. If it makes sense to you, then it's massively useful. And as long as when you get to the point where it's got to be understood by others, you give a thought to reducing that degree of sort of personal choice. In other words, you make something more understandable and comprehensible to a wider audience. Then I think it will still work.
Thank you for that. You mentioned color. Color is something Fabienne and I haven't really been talked about, and I just thought about it today. So thank you for highlighting that, Mark. We do need, as a community, to play more with color, to make documents more visual, and that's a huge discussion for another day. So now that Fabienne got up to get more light in, suddenly I'm going to hand the mic over to Fabienne.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Super, wonderful. So I will actually first start by introducing Felix a bit more. We had a brief discussion, or we actually had a discussion, well, or if you want to do it yourself also, that works. Up to you, as you prefer.
Fabian, you can cover it. I just wanted to pop on camera and say hello to everybody really quickly.
Super, thanks. So the idea there is that we're doing a lot of prototyping because we kind of know what we're doing through this project, but also not really. And so we try the crazier and crazier stuff we can do that is understandable. But that means a lot of stuff is hopefully state of the art or quite recent and breaks. As I often joke that sometimes the demo works and I'm happy if it works the second time. It doesn't always work the second time. And what Felix is working on is a virtual reality headset, kind of, where instead of having to plug the headset on and maybe it's charged, maybe it's not charged, you would have an emulator, so a fake headset, which is quite useful in some cases. And I'll put the link of his work in the chat. Because I think it's quite well documented with lots of nice visuals and quite clear API. So if you go in that example, that page rather, for example, you can see moving around or grabbing objects. And what's a little bit weird is that there is no headset involved. A fake headset is there. And that makes it very convenient for us to potentially try things. It's really just for testing, in the sense that if you do perfect programming and the emulator allows you to test it, but it's a bad idea, it's still a bad idea. So it's not sufficient to test it and say, hey, it works. You still have to put the headset on at some point and say, hey, it is efficient, it is pleasant, it doesn't make me sick, or whatever your criteria might be. But in terms of, does it actually do what I expect it to do? And without honestly having to put the headset on enough, Like, I don't have a nice haircut today, but if I were to have a bad haircut, I would totally blame it on the headset, because you need to put it on and off and on and off. It's honestly, it makes iteration slow. So yeah, this kind of framework, this kind of tools, and then processes it leads to, which I'll show also a bit, I think is more than interesting, it's important. So yeah, thanks Felix for the work, and thanks for being here with our elder conversation about using XR not just for games or entertainment, but for example here on research. So I think it's quite an interesting avenue. Felix, if he can, will also do a presentation in a few weeks whenever we find a good moment that works for everyone. So yes, please, I'm learning how it works, but if you have deeper questions, maybe he'll be able to address them then.
Thanks, Fabien, for the introduction. Thank you. Very happy to be here today.
Yeah, thank you, Felix, for being here today. It's really good to have your perspective on all this work.
Thank you.
So, Fabien, you will be presenting a bit and doing a workshop today. How
Yes.
do you want to frame it?
So I will share my screen. You all will interrupt me with your voice whenever you want, however you want. What I will probably have to do, which is a problem, is I can only share once, otherwise I need to reconnect and all. So I will start sharing now. And then I'll share until either we have to go or I have to go, or until everything is clear. And it's up to us. It can last 15 minutes, can last an hour and 15 minutes. It's whatever people find valuable.
So some of us, well, we are a diverse bunch.
Yep.
Some are more technical in certain ways than others. Could you
Yep.
please describe what you expect us to walk away with, what we should learn today? And also, just to
Yes.
make it clear to everyone, depending on the sessions being more technical, more philosophical, no one has to be here for the whole thing. We're so
Right.
grateful that you're here, but sometimes it may not be an area of your interest. So if you say, I got to go, no one's going to fly over and question what you're doing. This is all very nice and casual. That's why we can allow ourselves to go in different directions.
Yes, I am not going to get hurt if in 5 minutes someone has to go. What I would though really insist on is if it's not clear, you can either ask directly, like start talking, or ask me in private after, or on Slack, or wherever you feel like. Just like last time, some of the things, I mean, it can last 15 minutes, but for this, I need to take a few shortcuts. Like I'm not trying to explain how a computer works. Also, if you're not a developer, that's going to be tricky. You're not going to learn how to be a developer in 15 minutes. Though, to address the question you asked, Frode, my hope, though, is that even if you're not a developer, you start to see that, oh, if I were to invest the time to do either it myself or hire a developer to do that, if I were to invest enough time, I would be able to do this because it's not a black box, because it's open source. It doesn't mean it's properly documented. It doesn't mean it's clear, but at least that you see a path to integrate your kind of data in this whole ecosystem. That's the hope. Again, doesn't mean that's going to be super easy, but the hope is that after 15 minutes or an hour, whatever we narrow it down to, you think, oh, I have this weird data set in a format that nobody else uses but my lab. Here, I found a way that I might be able to bring it in if I believe it's useful enough. That's the key takeaway. Yeah, I'll share my screen. And yes, because I won't see your faces, don't raise a virtual hand. Just wait for the end of the sentence and start asking the question, please. So here we go. And I'll bring a bit of context. So please, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you, Dini. So the context is from the Future of Text Lab, us all, and we go back a bit to the symposium of last year. During the symposium, we had quite a few presentations. And after the presentation, I was showing a bit how to bring files into the environment. So I'll mute my virtual self or my recorded self. So that's the environment we had back then. One of the environment, because we had a bunch of experimentations. So we could bring PDF in, rendered as image. Some of the figures could be there. And what you could bring in were those files represented here as icons. And get layout out of this. You could have file like the post-it notes you saw to the right or here that appears. And you can basically, the idea there is that files, even in XR, even though they are rarely used, are still useful. Like the concept of a file is still useful. And a lot of things we manipulate, when we manipulate text, end up being a document inside a file. That file has a file format. So if you can have yet another file format inside your XR work environment, then it's going to help you to whatever task you're into. That's kind of the very big picture aspect of it. So we did a bunch of different demos. So some of the exploration of last year on reading in XR. Some of the different presentation, and some of what we have now. So the goal here, if I go back also to the schedule of today. So last time, so about a month ago, we also saw how to do what I called very creatively a converter. And what you can see, I'll put also that in the chat so that there is a reference. The converter is happening on the backend. So the backend means the server, which in that case is this one. So companion.beneteau.fr. Again, it's all open source, so you can self-host it if you want to. But this one is the one I maintain every day, so it should keep on working. And the backend, you have converters, so also to support file system or files rather. But those files are usually heavy and it takes time to do it. And it's kind of an architecture choice. Some of the things are done on the backend, some of the things on the front end. Roughly speaking, the light conversions, they are done on the front end. So everything happens in here in your browser. And the demanding things, they're happening in here, so on my server. Again, it could be your server, just make it more convenient for me to work on this one. So a month ago, we explored those, the converters. That's for heavy, let's say, file conversion. For example, a video, you're not going to do this in the browser. You could, but it might be trickier. And this time, we're doing for the filter. So that's the front end. Does it make sense, that difference between backend and front end, and thus that even though both are manipulating files, this one is for like on the spot, ready to consume, let's say, files, and not the other one?
Yes, sorry, we need to make sounds, I forgot.
You do, because otherwise I'll make heavy silence like this until somebody speaks. Either way, either yes or no, that's fine. Okay, cool. So it means this time we're doing, for example, especially that will speak most to Mark. Last time we did conversion, and this one we're doing the filter. Again, the naming is arguable. To also step back, that's kind of the architecture we have at the moment. In input, we have monitoring a file system where we upload files, and then we potentially convert them, so on the back end. And here on the front end, we have the filters. And one example of such a filter is taking a JSON file. Is it big enough? I can zoom a bit more, I guess. Is this big enough for most people?
Yeah, that's perfect now. Thank you.
Great. So we take a JSON file. It ends with a JSON extension. We have a little thing in the console that say, hey, it's a JSON file, just to make sure. We get that file and its content. And then we do a bunch of stuff to it. Okay, bunch of stuff to it. What's hopefully interesting for most people is most of that. So all this basically we can forget. Even though that's kind of the important part, we can forget it in the sense that if you copy that file and you change it, it's like a template. You can basically reuse that file. You can use another extension, and then you would be able to have your own filter. So that's kind of the hope there. And they're called filter also because, as you might also see from that function, they are one after the other. So it's not, you're not filtering one file and then that's it. You can have multiple filters on the same file. So for example, we could transform a JSON file to have some colors for some things. And we can have another filter applied after that say we change also, I don't know, the shape based on how big an object is or whatever we're into. And
Fabian, this
yes?
is probably a very good time for you to pause and do some more examples of what filters can do. That would be really useful, I think.
So another filter would be, for example, at some point I converted subtitle files. So from speech to text. So that was done on the back end. So for example, here on the back end, we have a converter that converts speech. So we get an OGG file. So that's an audio file. And then we convert it to the right audio type. And then using Whisper, so an open source speech to text solution or engine, we convert this to a subtitle file. And then once we have that subtitle file, we need to do something with it. And the something is then done with that.
Fabian, I still think it would be useful if you give us, just without doing stuff, just tell us a few things that filters can do, because filters in different modes have different levels of capability. So one example, you're saying there's a filter to convert audio to text, right?
No, that's the converter. So that's what I was showing here. That's on the back end. But then the filter takes that result and then shows it. Just in the console.
Can you explain what that means? Why do you need a filter to show something?
So there is nothing in the browser that knows what a .srt file is. If you open an SRT file in the browser, your browser is like, okay, I'm going to download it. I don't know what to do with it.
So the filtering here. Sorry for being a bit pedantic, but for the record as well, logically, what is the difference between converting and filtering a file?
So here in our context, converting is on the back end. So that's for heavy conversion, things that you cannot do in the browser at all, or not conveniently. You don't have Whisper in your browser. I don't think there are some browsers supporting some speech to text, but not of arbitrary audio files, for example. So this, I'm doing it here on my server on the back end. And your browser cannot do it. And the browser of the Quest or on the Vision Pro or VR headset cannot do this. So the difference between a filter and a converter, again, in this context, is that converters do heavy tasks on my server or on your server. And filters, they do light tasks on the device.
I think maybe we need a better name for it. When I hear filter, the two possibilities I think of immediately. One is producing a subset from an initial set, so that's one sense of filter, or the other sense might be changing the appearance of it, as in bold all author names. And this seems like it's more sort of a custom viewer as opposed to that. Also, I had two other questions. One is, are the filters intended to be chained like Koa middleware? And
Yes.
are they sync or async?
So they are. It is indeed doing both in the sense that they are kind of file viewers, but they don't have to. You don't necessarily need a UI around them. So, for example, this filter doesn't actually display anything in VR. It only displays in the console. So you might want to have something else. You might want to reuse that, but because it's the filter aspect is because it's sequential. So you have one filter after the other in order to be able to compose with them. That's kind of the hope that if you, Peter, make a filter for either that file format or another file format, we can combine with the filters I already have written. So there is both a kind of viewer aspect and a kind of them being sequential.
Thank you, dude. Does that mean that we can do what Mark and Dini talked about in the beginning, where let's say we have a JSON with a lot of citations, and there are issues like somebody did more than once a year. So we could build a filter where it displays it differently rather than just author date, for example. It does, like Peter said, author date brackets number 3, etc. Is that the level it can do?
Potentially. So this one is specifically, so I'll show a visual example also so that it helps a bit. I'll refresh that page and I'm showing 2 or 3 things at once. So you'll have to, I'll unpack that a bit. So that's the environment. And here I'm using also the eyewear, so the emulation layer, so that to refresh that one, so that I'm not I'm not touching anything. It's just happening on its own. So it replays a sequence of actions. So what it did back then, I'll refresh again so that you can see, is the hand is going to pick a reference and pass it through that ring, and then all the references that have the same year as the reference picked, they become blue. And this is done in part through that filter. So what this filter does is take the JSON file, so we can check it this way. If I go inside my network and I search for JSON file, so that's the file that Marks know quite well. Open a new tab. So that's the initial JSON that was received. So that's what your browser normally sees. And then what we do is we filter it, and then with JSON, we do a little debug message to make sure that's what we expect. Then we get the content, and then we do like adding nodes, so basically giving some visual to it, adding it to the scene. So that's the 3D world we're into, doing a bunch of stuff. And here we can have within it, here, I think this example is what you would start. You would do basically, you would copy that file, and then some of the logic that you described, Frode, that's where you would change it. You would add another, let's say, whatever you would be into. Whatever logic you need for your work, your task.
Thank you.
Maybe we should consider making use of some of the nomenclature from the functional optics academic community. I think that might be a better fit.
Can you give an example or two, please?
Lenses, traversals.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the partial lenses NPM package website, it has just beautiful tutorials and introduction to the area. So that's just a good spot to start.
So the name itself is not something that's I don't think.
Basically, I'm thinking that we want to synchronize our nomenclature with the existing literature, so it'll be easier for people to find our work.
I don't know if people are very familiar with it, but we can try. The let's say the most important aspect for this is to say we don't put everything in the same file, basically, and we try to distinguish, like we try to make it as modular as possible. And there are just examples where it is indeed like a middleware. You can imagine it, I guess, as if you're familiar with middlewares, as front-end middleware, and the idea being it's one after the other. And you can also have some how do you say, some logic in the order of the filters being applied to. Here, this one is the most really like what to start with. Is if you have an SVG file, you don't even show the content. You just say, hey, I have an SVG file. So that's kind of a little provocation to say, hey, somebody should do a pull request or should propose another filter that actually do display the SVG file, or do again whatever you want. The idea is those are examples of things one can modify. Can be for here it's like GLB or GLTF. You can imagine having like some kind of inspection of the 3D model, so that you can show the wireframe or change the color, or again whatever you're into.
Can I mention, I think, Peter, what you're talking about is good, and we're talking about findability and accessibility, right? I think perhaps what we're going to do is look at this. What we're doing right now is just simply getting the backbone structure done, and I think that what you're talking about can be integrated in the next step. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because the terminology is important because it's metadata, right?
Why I also, to be honest, why I don't say instantly yes, first because we must discuss it, and because what we have also since then, so filters were 2 months ago, examples of filters were 2 months ago, and what we have, which is new, we didn't have back then, that I think Peter relies more on, are those rings, and some of the discussion I had even just earlier with Frode, where it's going just to be on my webcam, but an example of if you look through a ring, and it's a discussion we actually had some of us, maybe even last year, if you do show a lens, indeed like a visual lens, that is a visual filter. It changes the way you see around you, and you see through that lens. So it's kind of tricky now. At which points do we use some nomenclature or some kind of way to name based on filters, knowing that some of the filters right now, just to give a bit again of context, we pull element through, but we might also look through and then see wireframes or whatever we want, but just by looking through. And then it would be lenses proper. So we wouldn't want those two things to collide, let's say, in terms of naming. Yeah.
I've got and also, well, question / observation. I think something sort of stepping back from the looking, and almost for the record, for looking at this from a sort of less technical perspective in the broad, the really interesting thing you're doing here is essentially recognizing the fact that if we want to do things like use lenses or filters or whatever to change what's being shown, we need the information. So one of the elegant thing that's being done here in an open way that people can add to if they need for particular formats is to make sure that the information that we want to ask questions about or do things with in the environment is available. So the thing is, if we've got an Illustrator file that prints big enough to sort of wrap a whole building in something, we don't need all that information. We don't need a native Illustrator app in the environment, but we might want very particular parts of that information. And the kind of thing the filtering or the converters can do is make sure that that information is available in the environment. Because essentially the knowledge objects, for want of a better term at the moment, are in a way proxies for the real document, which I know itself is still digital. But if you think of the document on your desktop as being like actual bit of paper or a drawing, when we bring it into the environment, we're actually doing an extraction of the necessary information we think we need at that. And because it's an open system, if we find we need more or indeed less, that can be adjusted. But I think that's a really nice elegance in this that is otherwise potentially missed. So it doesn't matter if, as a user, as a sort of lay user of this in a technical sense, it doesn't matter if I fully understand how that bit works. That the magic that's going on is making sure I have the information I need in the environment to do the things I want to do. Like, say, show me all of Nelson's papers, something like that. In the context, say, that we were looking at, a list of references. And there are all sorts of other things we can do. So don't take that observation as being that's all we're going to do with it. But that's the kind of thing I think it unlocks, I think.
Yes. To insist a little bit on this, I don't know if it's the magic or the laziness of it, but it's to say, yes, we support this JSON format or that SVG format. And then somebody knocks on the door and say, hey, I absolutely need XLS, so absolutely need PDF with DRMs or something like this, which to me, PDF with DRM is not something I want to support. I understand some people might want to from some specific context, and that's, again, the value of being open source, but still trying to be modular is, okay, you want to support this, please do it. Here are a couple of examples of how you could start doing this. And ideally, if you do so, well, share back, like make a filter that others like we can rely on, we can build on. So it's not saying, hey, now that we support, let's say, JSON from author and reader, the work is done. It's rather like that work has been done. It is useful, build on it, and share back for whatever file format you're into. So it's kind of an escape hatch for supporting more stuff. And that is done on the front end. And to address also briefly Peter's question about async and sync, right now the examples are sure asynchronous. So namely, you send a file, you get that JSON, you wait for it to be there, and then you do something to it. So for example, you display it or you put something in the console or whatever, but you need to wait, which I think for most JSON file in our context, for example, is fair. Like if you have a normal connectivity. So again, prototyping is kind of the ideal world. You're not like in the middle of the train or whatnot. It's in terms of prototyping, I think that's fair. That being said, what we would normally do if it's asynchronous, because it's a very big file, for example, like a big GLB that you need to process, you would like emit an event, and then you would have an event listener that say, hey, that file has been converted, is ready or whatever. So I don't think I have examples of this for filters, but I could, I'll add them. I'll add one, at least an example of asynchronous filter, because indeed it is something that it makes sense to support.
So the opposite is equally true, of course, which is very exciting. That is, you start with a XR native object or environment or thing or data or whatever. So instead of only thinking about going from the old world to the new, somebody may make something newer than us, of course, which is equally exciting. So in order for that to be real in this environment, it has to be somehow converted to fit our environment. So that then, Fabian, makes me ask, what are the things that needs to be converted to? If we use two examples, images and JSON, what is considered native at this point?
Right. So it's a couple of things. First, in terms of what's native indeed, so it will be GLTF or GLB, so a 3D model of that file format. It will be JPEG or PNG. I would say probably SVG also. So flat images, 360 images, video, 360 videos, primitives like a cube or a sphere or whatnot. And I think that's about it. So for example, TXT is not supported natively. Just to give a little bit of context in this, when we were talking about XR, like first of all, in XR, files are not supported. That's not the paradigm. Let's say you have an app and that app does stuff. It might support your file format, but that's not something that's typically done. So it means that's about it, like images, 3D models, and some primitives, but that's it. And what is again interesting is the filter sequential aspect to it, or middleware aspect to it. Is you can start to say, hey, I'm just going to support, let's say, take txt file, or then txt and then RTF, and typically you would expect this to build on top of each other. It's kind of the decomposition aspect that might be feasible and interesting, that we don't like restart with each file format. And if you have like rich text, typically that would be the composition of the previous primitives. So typically you would have text and an image in it. And then again, you keep on building on top of those previous filters.
So then we get another interesting layer of concepts, like somebody may have a specific concept map, knowledge map, whatever it might be, and that's described in a specific way. Maybe they don't use the word concept, maybe they use definition or whatever it might be. So even just translating vocabularies along might be really interesting. Yeah, thank you, Dini.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is I love this work that you've been doing, Fabienne, as you know, and it sets a good foundation for the next step, which is writing in that space, right? Authoring in that space.
Yep.
And I think that we struggled a lot in the first year, in the beginning of the second, to figure out how to conceptualize that next stage. And I think the rings has helped a lot, coming up with it. Even the simple term, I mean, it sounds goofy, but knowledge space, knowledge objects, all of those were points of contention. Like, what do we call these things? And so is it a cube? What is it? And I think it's interesting the way this is panned out in this vision that you've shared with us. So it's great because it gives us some foundation to begin to build on. So thank you. Mark had his hand up. Did it disappear?
I think Fred has his hand up. I do have an observation following from what you said, which I think is very interesting, because I think one of the things that's swimming into focus is that so one sort of paradigm shift here is that, and I'm for a moment I'm thinking in my mind's eye of Rob's notion of the volume of the work he's on, and so up to this point outside XR we would have considered that of, if I need this thing I need to look in this app, or I might have to take the data out of Word and stick it into Excel or something. Essentially here we don't have to do that. One of the things we do have to work out is what information we need, and then the magic can all happen in the space. I think viewed from not from a coding, from an engineering perspective, but from just a sort of human experiential perspective, that's actually quite a shift. I don't think it's one that's disruptive or anything. I think it's one that's actually enriching. But it's something that I think is part of the exploration we have to do here, to say to people, no, this isn't scary or weird. And I know it's different to what you had before, but don't use that as the basis of a zero-sum judgment, because we're not trying to say necessarily this is better than that. What we're saying is in this space, we can do all these things that previously were really quite difficult to do. And I think that's really exciting.
It containerizes the activities.
One of the things that came up earlier today, when I was having my nice little coffee, was when trying to think of the space, which is where we're going with this now, is we don't want everything in front of us, right? We quite easily, at least I quite easily go to, when we're in XR, we're standing, we're seeing everything like this. Some activities are really pleasant on a notepad on a table. Right. So when you're writing something, you may want to do this. When you're organizing, you may want to stand up or sit and do this. So the point is, what a wall is, whether it's a virtual wall, just a frame, or an AR physical wall, may also need to be translated. So that if an environment that you've been working with is, let's say it starts out in one of those poses, standing up and doing things. When you then decide to go into a different posture, if you haven't defined what the environments are, it may be really awkward for you. So they may follow you. Similarly, if you go from a home environment to an office environment, maybe in one of them, you have a computer right in front of you, so you can't really move your hand. So your virtual environment has to fit that. Maybe in another one, you're actually lucky enough to have a full VR room. So when the stuff that you have moved about, should it just be static, or should you actually have the let's even call it the grammar of the virtual environment be translatable between those so that the objects you're working with fits.
So
Lots of
one
things
way
to
that,
convert.
one way that could potentially be linked back there or in the within filters is those 3D objects, if they were virtual, there would be, for example, 3D models like GLB files or GLTF, which in the end is a JSON. So what we can do is have extra fields in that JSON file of the 3D model. So some of the field is like the 3D model of, let's say, the chair. So you have the thing you sit on, and then the back or the wrist rest, whatever. But what you can do, which I've done also in some prototype, is in that 3D model, you can put some code also. You can put some extra metadata of the affordances that would be subject to that thing. Let's say that chair, for example, sitting on that chair, which in XOR would be teleport to that spot so that you sit virtually on it. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. The point is that for the example of today of filters, in terms of architecture, we would have another filter for GLB that looks for that metadata in the GLB. Let's say, hey, it's the extra affordance in XOR metadata field. That's execute that piece of code. That's a bit unsafe, but again, prototyping, so I think it's fine. Or be readable by the environment and then add an arrow that say, hey, there is a new affordance there, and maybe it's a code snippet, maybe it's just text description, whatever it is. But the point is, in that example or this challenge that Frode you mentioned, that those 3D models with those potential extra affordances could be read and add within the environment as extra filters. And on the other side of it, the flip side of how to generate those 3D models, let's say in Blender, whatever you use to build those 3D models, you would have an extra metadata field that say, hey, affordance this or description that, and then be read back from a filter perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in addition to that is, it seems to me one of the amazing possibilities of working in XR is progressive disclosure. So, let's say you pick an academic document, depending on how much you drag it, you get more information, right? So it's not just a filter from small to now you see the whole thing. So different people may have different needs for what that is. Like when you pull it, you may have a different converter or rather a filter. Mark may have a different for me. That doesn't work on the original, doesn't work on the full thing, but the in-between thing. Because we have very different needs for what that should be. Should it be color? Should it be text? Should it be information? Should it be size? Blah, blah, blah. So the modular way you're making this, Fabienne, is really, really fascinating. Thank you. And over to Southampton.
Just a quick thought. I was pondering on this thing as sort of, a sense of, well, can I take my room with me? And I'm thinking, so how do we, and that's fine. There's no reason to not do that. But is that really is that the main affordance of the XR space, that I can build the room I'm sitting in, but sit in it somewhere else? Or should we be asking the question that it's not a matter of whether something like a wall is a good thing or a bad thing. Again, that's a pointless some sort of test. But it's more saying, if when I go to somewhere else, or basically when I re-enter this space, what language should I be using? So what hooks does the system need to know to make sure that when it starts up, that I see the right place and the right thing? I'm thinking again of Rob's comment a while back, and sort of in essence being able to sort of fly through his volume. Well, if there are lots of walls, you're going to be, every time you fly around, you're going to be bouncing off the walls. I'm being a bit flippant there, but and again, this isn't to disparage the notion of sort of fixed display structures, but simply that do we actually have to be quite so based on our physical working environment in order to get the most out of new things? My sense is we can, but we should be looking to do more, because otherwise it feels like we're driving the sports car in first gear.
Well, Mark, that's the whole point of what I was saying. I completely agree with you. In some environment, you may very well want it to be very hard-edged, and in others not. in order to do that, you must be able to filter based on what you're saying. So I think, yeah, fully agree on that. Fabian, please, I just had to interject. Sorry.
Are you talking? You need to unmute yourself, Fabian.
Thanks, Dini. There was a lot of billion things and you missed it all. Sorry. No, jokes aside, it is something I guess that most of you heard me also say quite a few times, like, oh, we need to go crazier and do weird stuff and whatnot. So yes, at the same time, there is an amount of crazy that makes it infeasible. So for example, if I have a virtual chair that is 10 meters high and my physical chair is, I guess, 50 centimeters high, I just cannot sit on the virtual one. So there is, yes, we can have crazy virtual environment, but when we actually put the headset and try it on, it has to work. So that's kind of a constraint that we need. The environment itself and the tool themselves, they don't have to be literal, but they still need to be usable. So it's kind of like when we're in VR, we still have a physical body that makes us move those things. So for example, if I put a ring that is just 2 meters away and I have my physics for wall through, it's very boring, but yeah, it just doesn't work at all. So it's kind of like the tension there is every time. Crazy, but still usable, which is not so straightforward, I think. Like just ergonomics, basically. One quick idea also that I had, that's why I had my hand up. So I put little examples there. I have actual rings, 10 euros ring with a cheap Bluetooth. It's funny to hack with. But it makes me think, because I think there was confusion a bit initially. I wasn't clear about filters, converters, and then the ring that we play with since a month or so, because of the chronological aspect. We did not have rings couple of weeks ago, and then when we pull through the reference card from the JSON file, then suddenly all the one with the right year are highlighted. So that is a kind of filtering, but that's not what was written 2 months ago. So I think there is a kind of confusion there, but that confusion might be useful in the sense that what I might try is to make those filters rings. So it means the filter that were designed 2 months ago, because they're applied sequentially, they are actually the functional equivalent of the design ring that we have in the experiments. So it means when we take a JSON file, they actually go through all those rings, and some of it are filtered, and that's maybe highlighted a certain way, and some of them are not working, so they might be highlighted a different way. So maybe that confusion could lead to something interesting, because then we would manipulate those filters as rings and then choose which one we go through or not.
May I ask Felix a question? Felix, are you still with us?
Yes.
This is just an observation. I'm guessing with the kind of work you're doing and having played in Meta and also Apple Pro, it seems to me a really great application for what we're doing here would be for avatars in space. There's no way in God's earth we're going to be able to travel in space like we had always imagined. That's been great science fiction, but it's just not physically possible. But what is possible is avatars in space and manipulating things from Earth in a virtual space on a planet, for example, or a moon. And till now, we've been seeing a lot of games in gaming environments. I'm on VR Fit, and a lot of, I play Beat Saber like it's like there's no tomorrow. But I'm also looking at what Apple Vision Pro is doing with museums and other kinds of serious applications. It seems to me the next step is building out some sort of system that we can actually physically do things, like write, make notes, create reports, communicate back, so to speak, in an environment like a space trip. And so from your perspective, do you agree with that? Do you see that we need to be doing something else to make that happen? Because I think that's a future for what we can do.
Hey, I 100% agree. Sorry for cutting you off there a little bit. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I think like the question is, I think first of all, I think like the kind of tasks you are describing. So it is either proper productivity, like writing something productive, do work in the headset, things like that. I think like that's definitely something that personally speaking, I think it would be something that we're seeing people moving into XR in the next however many years. But even faster than that, and this is only my personal opinion, I think like there is a lot of personal productivity things. Like for example, shopping online. There's WebXR is something that you can help enrich this process a lot more than what you can actually do on a 2D browser, for example. If you're shopping for a pair of Nike shoes, wouldn't be nice if you have this nice 2D panel, but when you wanted to take a closer look at the shoe, there's a button for right there that when you click on it, you still have your 2D panel configuration of the shoes, but now you have like 3D elements that you can see up close. Yeah, so I feel like, yeah, so either proper productivity task or like personal productivity task like shopping would be a perfect fit for this. I think the question here is whether you want to do it in a virtual environment or whether you want to do it while being able to see your actual room. Like is it whether it's creating a new environment from scratch or enhancing your existing one is the question everybody's trying to figure out. I don't actually have a great answer for that yet as well. I think like depending on different people, there's different needs here. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to say what you're talking about is augmented reality, and so what we're imagining is this can. I mean, XR implies augmented as well. So even though we're talking about virtual right now,
Of course.
the application is broader than that, right? So that's just an understood thing from our community. But what you're talking about is more commerce, which is great. And there's lots of entertainment and commerce applications for this, absolutely. But I think the fun thing about the Sloan project is that it's meant to be academic, and that implies a possibility for it being used in scientific study and exploration. So we're setting what I imagine that we're doing for my own self is we're setting the foundation for this to be used in a very serious way. And know that what's interesting is that when I talk about XR to my colleagues in the sciences and engineering, they generally just kind of have in the past gone, yeah, right, right. And I've done lots of projects in the past where we made like a virtual microscope, so that students can learn how to use a microscope without breaking them. So a virtual microscope instead of a real one, right? And we've done a lot of those kind of projects for the sciences and engineering. Sciences and then engineering, we've done things like sleep deprivation activities and things like that in these spaces. But what got their attention is this project in the sense that we can start actually authoring things. We're not just users, we're actually producers. And I think that's the difference. And if that's indeed the case, then the next step is to think about how the applications for this would work in other areas that's, requiring a body that we cannot physically use our body. Underwater, spatial, space travel, those kinds of things. So anyway.
Definitely, I think it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think like what you were talking about there as well. I think like it extends I mean, it could be a learning experience, could be an experience itself, but it also extends into the training space. I think this is something that we're already seeing a lot happening in the industry. Like I think been to these trade shows and I think Accenture has been building this for their clients basically, like hazardous environments. If you're a worker, like you can get very high quality training without actually being subject to, the elements and the actual environment, saving company a lot of time, a lot of money, while also, giving very effective training to their workers. No, but yeah, fully agree, 100%.
Just to say that I did a paper a long time ago, I'm looking at the date, it was published in 2004, so it's been well over 20 years. And I'd studied an expert system that was devised by a university on the West Coast for training soldiers how to be peaceful in a violent, potentially dangerous environment, right? And so it was a system where they trained soldiers not to just pick up their weapons and start shooting, right? And it had a really great success rate. And it was a huge multi-million-dollar project funded by the Department of Defense. And so I was looking at that system back 20 years ago and thinking about how that could be applied in other educational situations. And I think what we're doing here is a lot less expensive. And things have gotten a lot easier with some of the coding languages and even the game engines that we're able to use that didn't exist back then. So yeah, I'll stop there. Fabienne.
So that gave me a bit of time. I can't find I've done some experiment with XR and robotics, where basically with a headset you move a virtual cube and it moves the physical arm of a physical robot connected to it. That's an expensive arm that I don't have at home, but at home I have those Lego actuators. And then you have a Raspberry Pi on it, a mini computer, and then you have an API, and then you have your little robot at home. It's nothing as fancy, but it's functionally equivalent. You can't have the same payload and whatnot, but we can definitely integrate some robot arm or some actuators that move things in the real world. So we can definitely move real things today with XR and within our environment, because I've done some prototype with this before. And we can also 3D print whatever the robot arm is missing. So we designed the 3D printable part in XR. For example, through the environment we did with SCAD, so either programmatically or sketching it, and then we combine those. So I think indeed the idea that I'm going to sound a bit vulgar, but that we would have to just stick with only text as output it doesn't have to be the case. We can have output that is actuated, 3D printable, it's code and 3D models, it's code and movement in space. So I think it's very coherent to me. That makes perfect sense.
3D printed output is provocatively interesting, of course. I mean, I think this goes to some of, I'm blanking on the name now, having the physical markers on the walls that are scanned. He's even presented at the Future of Text. Why am I blanking on his name?
Motion capture?
No, I'm talking about brilliant guy. He used to work at Apple. That's Dream something. Has his own company now, but a lot of what they do is projector and scanner based. So you can put a physical note somewhere in the room, and the computer system knows what it is. It'll pop into one of our heads. I'm sure Mark will suddenly remember it. Yeah, 3D printed outputs is a nice thing in addition to all of this. Fabienne keeps chiding me correctly for thinking too much flatly. So if we think that at the end of the day, we have a tesseract from the foundation, that's always fun as well.
Yeah, but I think it's really, for example, with the rings now. So we have a system in place where we pull either code or a 3D model through the ring, and we can like apply modifiers to it to make it bigger and smaller, etc. Or we can replay going through the rings, and the output itself is 3D. Again, it's pretty coherent, and I think most people, except when they're playing with like actual Lego, most of us don't have cheap affordance to 3D objects, except if you spend a lot of time learning Blender or SCAD, it's relatively rare. So I think if we can manage to blend the two, so thinking with concept as text, and have also 3D output, like genuine 3D output, not just text in 3D, but I don't know what that would be, but let's say a model or movement in space associated with that model, and we preserve it. So with provenance and replayability, etc., we have something that I think in many different fields, from dance to architecture, there is something there to do.
So one of the interesting things is one of the earliest hypertext implementations was Zog, I think, aboard the Carl Vinson. Is that right, Mark? I was in the Carl, I visited the Carl Vinson, and I didn't know anything about this at the time. But one thing that struck me was they used wooden models of the fighters physically on the table to show which ones were in the air, which ones were in the hangar, and so on. I mean, I know that there's problems now. They keep falling off the ships, apparently. It's two over the last 2 weeks. But anyway, the reason for that.
You can use magnets. The other thing is, if it's wooden, it still works when the electricity goes out.
Exactly.
A point people forget.
Whether it's an EMP or whether it's just electricity not working. But it's kind of a fun thing to think about, a wooden little thing for these multi-million things. It's absolutely a great fun for us to think in terms of yes. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. We're here any given Monday.
Thank you. See you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, that was good that he's joined us. Yeah, so we've got to now think really multidimensionally for what to interact with. Any extensions of the topic for the last few minutes we have today? Yeah, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I'd really like would be able to use text to describe the three-dimensional worlds as opposing to have to do everything with direct manipulation inside the Blender interface. I'd rather talk at an abstract higher level of, give me a cube, put another cube to the right of it, move it up half of its height, and to be able to use, textual instruction to craft the 3D space as opposed to having to go in and either type in XYZ coordinates inside of a parameter dialog box or grab a hold of little anchors and drag things around inside of the 3D space. So I think text as an affordance for creating three-dimensional spatial environments is something worth exploring long term.
So we do have a demo with this. Don't remember where it is, to be honest, but we do have one which does, I think, precisely what you say, namely white sphere or add white sphere or add sphere, make sphere white. So a bunch of voice-based text instruction that help to construct a set of 3D primitives in front of you. And to be honest, it is definitely something to explore more because it works. The problem is quite it's not accessible. You need to both be able, because what makes it powerful. I'll look up. Sorry, I don't have the link right now with me, but I'll look it up. But when you say put the white sphere there, if you just do this, or put the white sphere or white sphere, it's cool, but it's not that powerful. If you bring the white sphere there, then when you combine both, then suddenly it's powerful. And when you can do it fast, where you both combine, because white sphere in front of you, that's easy, let's say. But put the white sphere at 3.1 meter, whatnot, it doesn't make sense. That thing you need to put there, and then you need to look at it. So the body there, the embodiment, the motion of your own body and your hand, plus the voice, that really works. But it's not just one or the other, in my opinion. That's what made it powerful. And then we can indeed think about what's the grammar for it, so that the instruction, they are not a bunch of super sequential things that don't combine, because that's just inefficient. But we have a Vision Pro demo, and I think Quest 2 maybe, because I think I added a speech to text quick thing. I'll look both the link for the live demo and the video recording. It is there somewhere.
I find it interesting that he still brought up commercial applications for this. And what we're trying to do is not that. There's so much money put in commercial applications that $250,000 put into just pure research is kind of unique. And with money drying up in the United States, it's gonna be even more unique as we move forward. But it's interesting that it was getting him to think outside of buying things. Just a comment. I was glad he was here.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Well, I thought, Dini, one thing that's interesting, and again, sort of brought to mind by research for a recent paper, is one thing is that I'm always surprised by is quite the divide between basically information sort of management science or management knowledge, so industry, and academia, who are actually doing often exactly the same thing, but just clearly not talking at all. And it seems to be a persistent divide. It's also rather true with a lot of visualization. You either get something that's very, very technically derived and very hard edged, that's so close to what you want but can't be done because it's marred in its underpinning, engineering wise, and it's sort of the hard edges beneath, as opposed to things that come out of, you might say, a more humanist thing where it's about the imagining, some more artistic thing. And I'm not surprised that there isn't more meeting. I mean, this is to me one of the excitements, in a sense, of the XR space, because it is plastic. I mean, it is what you make it to be. That potentially we should be able to break these things down, and so we don't have to depend on the sort of the silos that we've worked with thus far for all sorts of good reasons. We can choose to do it, but we don't have to do it.
Yeah. Frodo wants to spend some time on buy-in on projects, so we'll stop this conversation and turn to what Frodo wants to talk about now.
Thank you, Dini. Yeah, I was thinking it's just a light question, hopefully, might not be. I put a link here in the chat, and I'll also share screen. And we've gone through so many things of what is it we have to work with? What are the academic things available to us? So if you just have a look through, I'll skim through it here. So the top level thing we have in XR is a scene. That's the general name for it and can be discussed. And then, of course, we have saved scenes. So you can, do a layout and change the whole thing. And then we have two other things. And this is really what I wanted to bring up. One of them is as simple as XR documents. Let's not try to be too fancy with the naming. And then within that, we have to kind of decide on some way of referring to it in our own discussions. And volumetric frames might be one. But let me skip past the naming and go to this. This is where I think we should spend a minute together, no matter what we call it. And that is the things we have when we're authoring. What are they? Because it's very hard for us to build interactions and stuff without having a clue of what the stuff of work is. So what do you guys feel of this list?
So for example, let me just go through this with everybody and with myself to think through it rather than just look at it and respond. These are things that we use in academic writing, and we're devising some sort of hierarchy, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that when we do our sketching on paper, trying to build in XR, what are the things?
Well, we've talked about this a lot, right? We start with a sketch, right? We start with an outline, right? Actually, when I teach writing, I start with a thesis statement. Like, what am I trying to accomplish? What's my argument? What is the point of my activity?
What I mean by this is what are the tangible objects? So a thesis statement is a bit of writing.
Tangible object. It is a tangible object. I make students turn it into me before I let them even write a thing. They do nothing until I approve their thesis statement when they write a paper.
So is that different from body text?
Oh, yeah. Body text is part of the writing. So so before you even start writing the body, you have to explain what the point of your body is going to be. So here's what I'm arguing. Here's the point. Now I'm going to make an outline. I'm going to show you how I'm going to structure my argument. Now I'm going to write the text. In that text, I'm going to have references. I might have some images, some charts. There's going to probably be some endnotes or footnotes. I may have a glossary, probably not for undergraduate writing, but for us, yeah, that makes sense. But I don't know how anyone else writes. but having learned to teach writing back in the 90s, we start with the thesis statement before I even write a paper for
But is,
hypertext.
but is it in a different piece of software from Microsoft Word or whatever they use?
No, but it's outside the body text. It's not part of the body text. It's the first thing.
Right. So this is a big issue we have to resolve, and that is, what do we mean by body text even? Just kind of technically? Because yeah, I mean, hang on. The body text includes headings, and it's basically another way of saying the document, right? Because we're talking about what are the extractable things, like a list of keywords or charts. These are extractable things to put somewhere in space. I'm very happy to have a thesis statement, but I'm not sure if I should write that here or.
What about an abstract as a separate item?
Yeah, but when it is, I'm very much in favor of that. Down here we have a cover, which is supposed to have an abstract. So absolutely. And the reason.
But does a cover apply to a paper, or does it apply to? When I see cover, I think book.
The reason the language is this right now is, I'm sorry, first of all, the reason it's at the bottom of the list is you don't tend to write the abstract until you've written the paper. So even though when you export or print, so to speak, it'll be on the front, you will have the abstract there. The way that I was looking at it is basically a card, like a HyperCard. This is the thing that would float around in space. You tap on it and then you open the whole document. So I completely agree with what Dini is saying now with the thesis statement. Because Dini, am I right in thinking that you first write the thesis statement and then you do all the work, and at the end you write the abstract, right?
Oh yeah, you don't write abstract until you're done. Abstract is after the whole process.
So in a sense, so that makes perfect sense as a process. But in a sense, when we're talking about the grabbable things in the environment to move about, will the thesis statement survive? Is that something to give to a teacher for stage one, or will it be there when the paper's done as well, after the abstract?
It could be in the body of the text once you're done, but it needs to be separate at the beginning. Does anyone else ever remember writing? I mean, Frode, you just finished your dissertation. When you wrote your dissertation, I'm sorry, what?
No, I was just going to laugh at something about my stupid dissertation. Please go ahead, Dini.
When you wrote your dissertation, how did you start your process? What was the process of starting your dissertation in terms of writing? Not your meetings with your faculty member, but the actual first product of what you wrote. What did you turn in?
We had 9-month review or something like that, where we had to basically do it. Now, hang on, I'm just going to press a magic button for a second here.
Proposal. When did you write I mean, you start out.
Carl's saying he wrote his abstract first. One thing we ask our students to do is, if they're going to be writing a proposal, which they do in some cases, but the longer papers, they take their thesis statement, right, that they've turned in and had approved, and they expand that into a description of their paper, which then at the end we have them fine tune into the abstract. In graduate school, we had to turn in abstracts for conferences, which is crazy because the abstracts suggest that you've already written your paper and you know what you're writing about. So in most cases, people will turn in an abstract and then turn in a different abstract when they're done. So the process of turning in an abstract before you're finished writing, while it happens, it's probably not the same abstract that you ended up with at the end. You probably made significant changes to it. And so you have versions of your abstract, which is crazy.
I mean,
So just a little clarification. When I said abstract, I was thinking about this in the context of discoverability and the ability to quickly go through multiple papers and see what they were about and to decide whether they fit into a particular set or whether I wanted to dive in deeper or something like that. That's where I was thinking about abstract. But if we're looking about the other side of it, what about versioning? I mean, a lot of times with me, writing is very much an editorial process. I am probably one of the first digital native writers, in the sense that when I was in high school, we got our first computer And I've always written anything significant in my life on a word processor. And to me, that makes outlining less important because most of the time I'm just I start out by vomiting my ideas onto the page, and then I spend a lot of time making them make sense. And for me, versioning is very important. Not just I don't necessarily have that structure to begin with. I'm not saying that's not a good thing to do. I'm just saying that's my process, and I know other people who write that way too. If you grew up with typewriters, I can see why you would want to set up an outline first, because it would be a massive pain in the butt to have to edit at that level over and over again. So,
What we
but
called an outline back when I was teaching writing was more of a mind map.
mhm, sure.
So we'd have the students mind map everything and say, okay, so this is what you're arguing. So what are your three major points? Or
Hmm.
4 or 5 major points. Now, what is going to be your evidence for each of those points? We'd mind map that. And so it's same thing as an outline, but we'd have them sketch that out in some way. I've got to get to my next meeting, everybody, so I apologize for leaving 4 minutes early, but I got to get to the 10 o'clock meeting and I need water in my glass before I start that one.
Jeannie, that was very, very useful. Thank you for that. That really glues a lot of components together. So we'll keep talking. Thank you.
Okay, bye, everybody. Thank you.
Right.
Bye for
Deanie.
now, Jeannie. See you.
Good work,
quick
Fabian.
a quick thought, actually following. I mean, Fred had picked it up as a comment, but one observation when we were discussing this the other day, and having worked in a multidisciplinary sort of PhD factory of about 70 people going through, all the one thing that everybody basically had to be doing was not working in one subject area. And what you observed is, yeah, no one used the same process, didn't use the same tools, didn't use the same process. I think one of the challenges we got here is that understandably we're mixing process definition with the component things we have at hand. For the
Absolutely.
perfectly good reason that we're trying to figure out, okay, well, if I'm going to write something, what do I want? And so these things actually, in a sense, they have multiple identities. So there are things that are text versus, say, video or something else, that may go in any of those sort of constructional boxes. You may have things like an abstract, which for some people is what you start with. For other people, it doesn't even appear until the end. So it's a notional structure that you may think about or inquire about. You might say, show me the abstract. You might get none back because there is none. I think the challenge is, or the thing to hold on to is to not assume this is a fixed structure. And I think also hold on to the fact that is to not let process, which is invariably also past looking, guide our thinking too much. So a number of the things we do, a number of things, for instance, that Dean's just mentioned, are much more pertinent to earlier stage in academic education. So you're teaching people how to do the process. If you go to someone who's, as it were, a mature scholar somewhere down the line, who's now not maybe even teaching, they're just submitting papers, they probably will be going through some of the same process, but they're doing the bits that they know and which they need. And so again, so understanding some of the things which are, for instance, there as guardrails for the novice in the organization, because some of these things you have to be shown, because why would you know they're there? And so these are all hintings that we want to put on this, which is the slight danger of this is the problem of premature formalization. If we rush to give too many things labels, they turn out to mainly be wrong. I think the axes we can draw are sort of process terminology, different types of information, by which I don't necessarily mean just is it rich text or is it video, but it's probably more the sense of it's getting towards more the sense of the body text, the manuscript. Is this something that is sort of in a sense the output, or is this obiter-dicta around it? Is this other stuff that I absolutely need, that is absolutely of consequence in doing the task that I'm doing, but it is not of itself something that will go in there.
Fabian has to go, Mark.
Okay.
We absolutely agree. We agree with that. And we can continue another few minutes, but Fabian, thank you. That was extremely useful, and it's really good to have a reference video of that now. So that's all very, very good. So now we're going to spend another few minutes arguing over terminology. So you're very lucky that you can leave.
Yeah, and
Is he
I agree
gone?
with.
I think he's gone already.
Nope,
His
there he
image
goes.
stays up quite a while.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah, I agree with Mark. I think you have the user notes, but I think there's a complexity to that. Sometimes, like I'll be halfway through a piece and I'll go, you know what? This train of thought really doesn't fit into the master narrative, but it's a good train of thought, and I want to be able to put it off to the side digitally. And usually, when I'm doing this in Google or someplace else, I'll just create a fresh document and drop it in there. Of course, the problem is I lose track of it. And then 6 months later, I come back and I go, "What the heck was this?" But to be able to have that virtually available to see, to have these site, call them rabbit holes if you like, but that might be useful. That to this particular piece that I'm working on right now, it's just not, they don't fit where I am in my thought process. My brain is raced ahead of my writing or something like that. Or they may be useful for a completely different piece that I want to start at a later date, so that I want to like have a holding area for ideas essentially. User notes is one way to do that. I would think if there are layers to that, that would be good. I don't know what that actually would look like in the sense of having versioning or something like that. Just a way to, just a shoebox full of pieces of scraps of paper, of metaphorical shoebox of notes to myself kind of thing too.
Yeah, I mean, these are exactly the issues we're dealing with, and I'm, in normal speak, I was, I'm a bit tired of going in circles on this. We need to do what Mark said. Process is one thing. Bits, I mean, what I wrote here, it is what we can get our hands on when authoring. Something that's grabbable as a unit, right? That needs to be decided. And so for Dini, thesis statement is a really big deal. Absolutely fine. As a guardrail, as Mark said, I'm grateful for this language today, because if we help with a system where you have guardrails for outline and mind mapping, it's fantastic. Not everyone has to use it, but when it is used, it's nice that it has a kind of a pigeonhole to exist. But at least for the other things, and I mean, the reason we wrote body text, because I talked to Fabienne a little bit about this, is if we call it the manuscript is kind of all of this, right? In the whole history of humanity, we haven't needed to have this level of decision of what it is, because people just have their own stuff on paper, right? Mark, then Peter.
Very quickly, I mean, this was sort of bubbling up in the chat too. I think what I took away from what Tom was just saying is, yes, so we have something now, and so previously in the before the computer, I would have written it on a side piece of paper. Now I put it maybe in another document. I don't think necessarily we have to fall back on those notions in XR. What we should be looking to is, okay, how do I tie these together? Because one of the things that we can do, because we, in a sense, we control this environment because we've absolutely constructed it, is instead of actually knowing that, oh, right, that was my previous draft that related to this, is the fact that we can have much, much closer ties where needed, not always the case, but where needed. So that in a sense we can inquire of our environment, and it can resurface these things for us, rather than, as we would do now, have to go and find another document or another application or another window. Another thing that's sprung to mind is when you talk about something like, say, the thesis statement or something, is that another manifestation, another axis you can look at this is some of these terms, something that can also be used in the way of a manifest. So we might say, to get to the end of this ride, you've got to pass, you must pass the following challenges. So, you will have an abstract, you will have a something, and then usefully we can have some tailback on that. We probably don't want it all on over the time. We don't want something constantly reminding us how little we've written, for instance. That is not motivating. But it's something that we will want the system to know. But if we did want that tailback, for instance, that could be done, say, in some very subtle visual hinting somewhere, for instance, in a way that I think is easier to do in something like XR than it is in other things, because we don't have to build a window to put in everything. We can just, in a sense, we can just put that thing in the space. So I think in other words, though you still have to build it, there's a lot less scaffolding than is normally needed, ironically. I mean, it seems to be the other way around, but I don't think it is. And I'm not expert in this. I may be completely wrong. And I'll stop there because I use my other hands.
We shouldn't build too much scaffolding, of course. But so just on what Carl said, here in the view, if you just have a thing called marked, as some of you know, or to do, right? As long as that's defined, you can even give it a color, whatever. Then all you have to do to the things that deal, just add that tag. So it's more of a process thing, and it's not hard coded into the system. Peter.
Yeah, I think sometimes in academic writing, we kind of fictionalize our process after the fact.
Yes.
There are lots of times where I don't really know where I'm going. I do not have a thesis statement ahead of time. I will actually just start writing to almost have a conversation with myself. And then the direction I go evolves, sometimes in a completely different direction than I thought it was going to go at the start. Then when I'm polishing up the document, we'll go back through, come up with a little abstract, and make it sound as if we knew exactly how it was going to come out and had everything fully outlined ahead of time with the wonderful mythical process that English writing professors would like to teach, this hypothetical world in which we know exactly where we're going and what all of our arguments are going to be down to the last cubby hole. And it's just a matter of going through and walking the outline to spit everything out in a linear fashion, when in reality, a piece 2/3 through might have been the first thing I wrote, and it'll be completely out of order. And the actual development process does not mirror the final document at all. And
But Peter, that's not a problem. That's a positive thing, even within what we talked about now. Because I can imagine, even if you pretend you're Dini's student and you follow exactly what she said, your thesis statement is kind of I'm going on an expedition. I think I'm going to do this. It may be vague. I don't think there's anything wrong with it changing completely. And I think it could be very valuable for you to write that. I see your thumbs up, so I'm glad you agree. But yeah, let's not pretend that this is linear stuff. Tom, and then we need to start winding down, I think.
Well, just to throw another wrench into it a little bit, my writing process, this conversation that Peter was talking about a minute ago, I have started bringing in someone else into that conversation on a regular basis, and that's AI. And that I'm bouncing back and forth in and out of, getting feedback, clarifying things that, did I say this in a way that makes sense, et cetera, et cetera. It's sped things up quite a bit. Do we want, if this is an authoring environment in that sense, do we want to provide a window to get to an AI to where you could have a port
We're not
of some sort?
No, we absolutely acknowledge the importance of AI, but for this loan, we're staying away from that. We're treating AI as a friend. It may be, as we say, it may be Peter who gives us some information. It may be AI. At this point, we don't care, right? For this project, it's just too big, right? And
Right.
It's information going back and forth. So what we're looking at doing, because we're going to be doing a 6-month review on the 16th of June. So we're now looking at the scenarios for what to do. And one thing that I've been vacillating on, I finally decided we're going to start with my software author sending a JSON to the headsets, because it'll be an open and clearly described JSON that anybody can use. In fact, it'll be a self-describing JSON that the beginning of it says the following values in English mean this and that, visual meta approach. That will take maybe 2 minutes of our whole thing, because we're not doing my software, it's just a demonstrator. Then we go in and do the interactions that we're really beginning to build together here. But at the end of it, we do not send it back to author. That's too complicated. That's for product. Right now, it's just to get to that space. And I'm really excited by what we've been talking about here. The stuff that doesn't go into the paper is as important as what goes in, and how to separate those two things semantically in discussion, I find really hard. That is why we've had a manuscript thing, we've had a cube, we've had all these language things for it. So, we're just trying to look at that. And so that's why this page that I sent the link to, it's just trying to allow us, while we do our pencil sketching or whatever it is, to say, we know we have references and they have certain things. We know have pictures, we can do certain things. Yeah, it's nice that it's becoming a bit more clear, that it's becoming formalized, and Mark, that formalization has to be breakable, absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I also suggest actually maybe if we spent less time trying to name the thing, because I mean, this is, for instance, a thing like body text. I think everybody sort of knows what it means. Everyone knows what it means right up until the point where you have to get everyone in the room to say it's exactly the same thing. So in other words, I think a lot of these things work perfectly well as concepts. I'm not sure that trying to formalize them more than that doesn't actually cause us problems in what we're trying to do.
It's adjacent to what you're saying, Mark. You and I don't disagree, and I think it's really important to highlight that. What I'm saying is, when I go for a coffee at Cafe Nero in Wimbledon with my, beautiful fountain pen that I bought in China and my paper notebook, I need to know what I'm trying to draw, and it needs to be done with you guys, right? So some of them are obvious, but they're actually really tricky other ones. For instance, we know that charts is a category. Chart is defined as an image that has data with it, whereas a picture is photograph or drawing, right? For example, and those things may or may not be useful to separate. We know that we can have the references. We know we can have an abstract on a / cover page type thing. We know we can have a glossary, maybe defined concepts, which maybe are mapped out. We can have marked text, highlighted text, list of keywords. And we know that the user may have written their own notes for this document.
So you bring up a really useful thing there in a sense that
really, thank you.
Yeah, because it's saying, well, when you were talking about sort of say charts and pictures, and you think, well, actually, is that true? Is that true today in the way that it was 20 years ago? And this isn't to sort of make an argument from it, but simply to say that I think so. The useful question to ask is what things, without even really worrying too much about the names, what things are definitely different to something else? You probably can't put dogs and cats in the same box, or they'll fight like mad. So they are separate things. But some things are more amorphous. In other words, and especially I think when it comes to some visualization things, so it used to be that something like a chart was something that went off, and then you send it to the graphics department, they'd make an overhead projector slide and all come, or you'd send it off to be photographed. I mean, now we're thinking about you'd have a document, you can effectively take a data set, write a document in something like JupyterLab or our Bookdown, and you can basically have what in old-fashioned sense is a book, but actually just sitting on top of a massive data set with pictures, charts that are actually live, which therefore aren't really charts in the way we just described them. So that's why I say I think it's interesting to say is to look at say, well, what things definitely can't be the same as something else, because then we definitely need a different handling method for them.
Yes, that is logical. Also, in terms of you should be able to grab whatever thing and move whatever you want. But let's say, for instance, charts, where charts absolutely should be, some of them will be interactive in this environment, very important. They will probably want, okay, sorry for waffling. You read something that looks roughly like a PDF, come across a chart, you pull it out. You probably want it presented in a specific, useful way where you can do the interactions if they are there, or maybe go into a Bob Horn, Brandl style massive room, right? Which is quite different if you pull out a photograph, right? Even though the photograph may even be an image map where you can actually deal with different parts of the picture, maybe not. I think your point holds, Mark. But the thing is, if you want to, let's say, all the pictures on the wall, that might be different from pictures and graphs and maps, right? But that may be just a simple tag. And because we haven't done this enough, I mean, map is not listed on this page, for instance, as a world map.
I also always sort of think, it sounds like a kind of thing to do. I'll take all the dogs and put them over there and all the cats over there. But what have I learned? So actually just taking all the chart. So for instance, if I'm reading something, I might see a chart. I don't think actually what I want to do is see that on the sort of the chart wall. I'm thinking, do I even understand what it is? And is it actually vaguely interesting? In other words, do I need to circle back and look at it? Or is it just interesting and pretty and diverting? And so the necessity of these things being extracted is not necessarily useful, apart from the fact it gives one more warm and fuzzy feeling that, oh, look, I can see all the charts over there and all the pictures over there. I don't know that I gain anything from it.
It's not about warm and fuzzy, Mark. It is about the fact that even a physical desk, very quickly gets messy. And yes, it is a mess created by the user, so it's not mess in every sense of the word. But when we are talking about environmental stuff, I'm not saying we should keep this particular distinction, but we need to have a few. I mean, as we talked about, when you are writing, you may actually want to write in pen and paper on a physical table in front of you with your headset on. You may want to do that. And then you may want to lay out your argument massive, right? These are very different things. And I need to know as a designer, and I think you also would like to know, what are the things that I could put there? I mean, can I put paragraphs over there separately? If so, how do I select them? What are the thingamajigs? And it may very well be, Mark, to take your argument that literally pictures of cats should only go there. So in a specific instance, it could be useful. Generally, it wouldn't.
So the point about, for instance, is so you might have a whole lot of paragraphs or something that are essentially going to be part of what we're loosely describing as body text. The interesting part really is that it's not so much the layout, it's how can I interact with them? And I think that the interesting informational bit that's creeping into this, because of the way we're having to bring things into the space, is, if we're a bit more clever about how we connect things, then we can actually, instead of having to literally grab that thing and put it there, which is basically like doing paper cut and paste, as done in the newspapers, there is a potential to have much more sort of clever reintegrations, and indeed essentially have versioning, because you can pull in the things if you've hinted them.
That is the key. And what Carl is saying here about different ways of organizing, that's also the key. The thing here is you should be able to literally snap your fingers to go through entirely different layouts of what's being shown in the room. And if you have a picture of a cat, it should be in 5 different places if you wanted to. Absolutely, shouldn't have to be like paper. All of these things are very, very true and very, very important and very, very easy to discuss and very, very difficult to design. That's why we need to have some discussions like we're now on what are the things. I mean, even outline. What does outline mean? Does outline mean just headings? Or does it mean headings with the stuff below it attached? Because those are 2 different kinds of outlines, right? Does it mean outline? What I mean, Mark, is imagine you take a paper and you have introduction, and you have a column for introduction, you move it here. And then you have research, and you have another column, you move it there. So it's like pages, but not by pages, by length, right? That's one way of dealing with the headings, right? So is it a heading? Is it a section? Is it an outline? How do you move it? What are the constraints? All of that becomes interesting. So what I'm experimenting with in Author, as you saw in the beginning today, is when you view the outline, what other stuff is actually useful? We've had many types of things. References might be, your selected text might be, and now we have this notion of a thesis statement. Do we want the thesis statement to be a special thing in space that reminds you, top left-hand corner, for instance, what you should be working on? Do we want to have Tom's ideas floating off as little pieces of paper, or how do Tom's thinking around it want to be, right? What are the tangibles? We are at the point of dealing with tangibles. As you've said, Mark, we got to start pinching and moving things about.
Well, interestingly, I mean, in a sense, the challenge. So you things like the thesis statement. I mean, without going down the full AI route, but the ability of the environment, because it's a constructed digital environment, to remind you about the things that you've chosen you needed to be reminded about, is something as yet I think, under manifested. So if it's very important that you had a list of N things that have to be addressed, have got into the part of your environment that essentially is your body text, it's kind of quite useful to know where you are on that. Now, you might want to not want to know it all the time, but that just becomes more a visualization. Whether you can actually see it at any one time or not. What that goes back to is in doing a particular task, therefore there is in a sense a manifest of things you have to do, for want of a better word. I think that's probably word be overused in all sorts of other contexts. But there are a number of things that you sort of know. Well, either you know, or the person who's tasking you to do it, or the process that you have to work within is telling you that you must have. And those are things you might want to track your progress, very small p, against, because it defines how you check the progress.
But Mark, one thing that's, I got to go, I'm afraid, but one thing that's really, really important is that we are not building a production environment for an academic. We just can't do that. If we get more money for more years, absolutely, we would love to do that. We don't want to do something completely unrelated to academia. So it is very much a balance. And of course, we all change what we mean by that. What we're trying to do here is give people an excited, I have to put it in this terminology, an exciting view of what working in XR might be. That's the key thing, because we need to keep innovating. We may never put anything to market, but if we inspire someone else to do a actually useful Microsoft Word or whatever it might be, hopefully not that, then I think we've done a great job. So I don't think we should think about process, accept that different academics have different processes, and then make the most incredible interactions with the basic academic units in a space. Okay, I'll just read you this brief thing. And for those of you who want to join on Wednesdays, this is part of it. I can imagine the scenario being that someone puts on okay, we start on external software just so they can see it's that stuff that goes up, right? You put your headset on, and what do you see in front of you? You see an original, tiny, low-poly Macintosh, because that represents the data you were on, which instantly fades, and all you're left with the screen. And the screen is the abstract cover or thesis statement, whatever is the thing you're working on, plus more. And I don't know what that means. Does it mean layers behind it? Does it mean something? But it comes from somewhere and goes spatial, right? Just a little bit of theater. And then we have the question of, and then what? And then what really comes down to very physical things like, are you sitting when this is happening? Or are you standing? Do you have a physical table in front of you that you want to acknowledge or ignore? Very different things. So you could imagine one thing, having a fake environment like a Greek temple, which is something Fabian tested earlier today, which is on the website now, you can click on it, right? So if you have a Greek temple as just a way for your head to not just be in a gray space, you can then maybe say, I want this information there, that information there. You have these virtual memory palace walls you can use. And this is where we get into the notion of, what are these walls? Are they part of a polygon, or are they considered right wall, left wall, or are they office wall? Are they current project wall? All of these things happen. What can you put on them? So you should be able to work with this fake environment, but also to remove it, to be in a completely gray space. And then something close to, I think, all of our hearts is, you should be able to go into a much more Ted Nelson space, where when you're dealing with your citations, you really go to other documents to see them in situ. And you can choose to see how these citations work, right? We can only build this once we have tangible things. We need to know at least the beginning. What does someone else's citation look like to you? How do you want it to be, etc. So we need to be very, very, very concrete for a while. I see your message there, Tom. I hope you're traveling somewhere exciting.
Just visiting my mom up in Ohio and then driving through Pennsylvania to visit other relatives.
That sounds good. Yeah, we do look forward to your presentation. Carl, we have existing tools and workflows that exist, yes, but the thing is, okay, one of the things I've noticed doing demos with people with the various things we've had, when they can just take a thing and move it there, that is freaking amazing. Right, when they have the freedom to place a bit of knowledge there. Now, the original Macintosh 9-inch screen, absolutely amazing. But once you have a few files and a few documents, it's too tiny, right? So it's the same here. In this environment, you can do that, but it's our job to make it, to do the other magic levels. Like, okay, you made a mess of your knowledge now. Then what? Is it helpful for you to have a panel where everything so-and-so goes? Is it helpful for you to go back to another thing? And also progressive disclosure is going to be important, because if you follow a link, at what point do you see what? Because you could so easily just make your environment, hundreds and hundreds of connected things, which will be bad. So yeah,
I'd suggest the answer is to try all these things out of an overall process. So, for instance, this sort of the phrase has dropped from my mind, but you're saying this progressive disclosure thing, which I think is which is very pertinent. But I think that they are deliberately best tried outside the context of something else, because what you're trying to do in each of the small tests is saying, is this a meaningful thing? The fact that I can do it, or it might be exciting, or just I couldn't do this before, is not necessarily actually meaningful in the wider task. So I think those things are easier to assess, and that's one of the joys, in a sense, of Fabien's approach. Actually, it's so modular, because you can look at something and you can almost immediately see things that will scale and things that won't scale, and the things that won't scale are definitely problems to mark at the side to loop around to. Do you need a different paradigm for that? Because if it's a task, a thing you have to do, and you know that the model you have at the moment won't scale, well, then you're going to have to think of another way into it. So I sort of the disclosures interesting, because what I think that what that comes off, what that sort of hinges off, is often when you're writing a document, it's almost, well, it's when the ADHD kicks in, but you think, all right, I really need to understand that thing now. And sometimes you actually do, sometimes you don't, but that's what you're doing, and you need to go out, you need to sort of branch out of what you're doing, open up some more things. Whether you need to be doing them in the XR space is a question that we should validly ask, and not assume that we're doing it just because we can. Are we doing it just because we can, or because actually we're sitting outside a space station and there isn't a desk we can go and look at? Or is it a case where we're doing it, is it more meaningful to do it there? Or is this the sort of thing where you might want to drop out of that?
I think it's more lighthearted than that, Mark. I think it is simply, okay, so when we were in Tokyo, we went to Tokyo Disneyland, of course. We did the Star Wars experience. It was pretty good. And there are some Star Wars experiences in America that we really want to see that are amazing, like the Millennium Falcon, blah, blah, blah. It is, I really think the key thing here is the experience, because I don't think we have the capability to build something that will truly help us work yet. We just don't have the bandwidth, space, or anything, right? So I really think our job is, when you come to the future of text, someone puts on the headset, they can start interacting with stuff, and they can feel, wow, not only could I move that one thing, but I could do these things and suddenly have a completely different view of my world, right? To make that real yet, to see if it's actually useful, I think that's a later stage, even though we should keep it in the back of our heads. But right now, it's about magic, right? Got to give. Well, Mark, what I mean is, academia today, a lot of it sucks. A lot of academic processes and ideas are absolutely, in my view, awful, right? A lot of it makes people like me not be able to do it. I was very, very lucky, very much from your support, to be able to get my PhD, but I have the wrong kind of personality for this. It should be opened up to more people. The processes should change. The notion of the academic paper is absolutely fucking stupid. That's the most polite thing I can say, and I know you agree. It should be much richer. No, I mean, like, first of all, to even read these columns, a lot of people have problems visually reading. I have to develop my software to help people with vision problems to actually read it, right?
Yeah, but that's a legacy issue of print.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. There are so many legacy issues, and Mark, you really hold the flag on this. We need to get past them. We need to look at, what does it mean to think? What does it mean to communicate? All of these basic things is what we really have to do. right? And just like you say, the notion of the paper and all of these things, it's not brilliant. So that's why if we look at the core things, we are trying here to figure out a way, you put your knowledge in, you add to it, you move it around to make some kind of organization, and you share it with someone else. The basics are really simple. If we drop a lot of the academic side of it, right? As in the academic surface, let's put it that way. But even within that, we need to have the feeling of, I really do think we need to have the feeling of excitement. Like, I have the Vision Pro. I watch movies on it when I travel. That's absolutely no benefit for my work whatsoever because I have a 27-inch screen, right? There's absolutely no benefit. It's insane. And there's not even anything that I found of software or XR experiences that gives me that feeling. The feeling still exists in our dialogue only, to me.
Yeah. The only reason I'm cautious about excitement is that excitement is not necessarily well correlated with something useful. People can get very excited normally because it's something they haven't seen and it's very novel, and they'll absolutely say, yes, I absolutely need to have 40-point lime green text on a purple background in every tool I use. And turns out they never use that. I use a deliberately flippant example, but it just shows this disconnection between what we in the moment. So we react to the sort of fun excitement of it, but it's all too often. I go back. I think back to my first career, and we were working on naval systems and things. And what got people excited was not the thing this was then built at vast cost. They then didn't use that, and it turned out the thing that was actually meaningful, had anyone been paying attention at the time, was stuff that was in there that wasn't then that actually then didn't properly get developed. And that's the lesson I sort of carry with me, which is not because I'm against the excitement of things. I'm not being clear in that sense. But I think it's dangerous because it actually stops us concentrating on whether the thing makes a meaningful difference or not.
Okay, I'm not interested only in meaningful difference, right? I think it's really important for me to, as a single person, say that, because on one level, I deeply care about meaningful difference. I mean, my PhD, as you helped me with, Mark, is simply documents should say what they are, what they contain, where they come from. It's a bloody obvious thing. I've never told it to anyone who didn't say that's brilliant, should do it, except for the academic publishing people who say, no, we don't want to do PDF or HTML. We're going to do something new. Can you tell me what that new is? Oh, we haven't decided yet, right? So on one level, all night, I will sit with an espresso and agree with you, Mark. But on another level, I really do think that right now we need to build excitement for XR beyond the capabilities that our group has to deliver. Some of it can be holodeck, which is ridiculous in Star Trek in some ways. If it is too much and too far, and it turns out that it's not useful, if it inspires someone else to make a production thing, job done. So I think I polarize myself on this, Mark, not just in dialogue. So please know that I think we're all on the same page, but I'm really scared that we'll have something useful, but it won't be used. I would find it much better if we get a little thing on the BBC, let's say, for the sake of argument, since we're here, that says XR people doing something ridiculous, but you got to look at it. And then it goes further and further.
Can I offer quickly two examples? One, General Magic. If you haven't seen that documentary, I highly recommend it. But they did something extraordinary that was 10 years too early, and therefore it fizzled into nothing. The other one is VisiCalc. I think people got excited about VisiCalc and the ability to have digital spreadsheets that allowed them to predict the future with numbers in a way that wasn't possible before VisiCalc. Yeah. And that is what I'm looking for with both AI and visualization and XR.
My wife is teasing me away, and I hear both that, and I see what Carl's saying about hype is great. You got to be careful. Carl, we're not selling a product, right? So this is not about it's going to be the best, buy it. All we're doing is helping people, other academics, other buildings in the future, builders, refer back and say, that stuff that they did was shit, but it was cool. However, this other aspect of it was absolutely brilliant, right? We should just really have fun. We should enjoy ourselves. I mean, you're talking about General Magic, Alan Kay, well, yeah, all of these people having fun, you know, they were doing something different. So, yes, sorry, my wife's ordering fish and chips. I got to make sure I agree with what she's doing. Yeah, you also have a dinner bell, Mark.
Haddock or cod.
I wish.
This was fun. And if you have any
That's all.
specific fun ideas, don't keep them a secret. Thanks for today. Bye, guys.
Bye.